Growing up, a childhood crush between neighbors can be so sweet.
It was cute, that's all it was, it's cute.
Unless the feelings aren't mutual.
I wasn't interested in dating anyone.
Leave me alone!
When parents move in to protect their children, things rapidly spiral out of control.
I think all of this could have been prevented.
And then it's too late to turn back.
Conflict should have been stopped right there.
What's tragic is that a simple dispute escalated in a very short time into violence and a homicide.
On the shores of Lake Erie, east of Cleveland, lies the city of Euclid. But it's really more of a town, population just under 50,000. Our peaceful little neighborhood is an ideal place to raise a family.
Euclid, it's a big, sprawling community, middle class, blue collar, great values, great community.
And that's exactly what brought the Covington family here 5 years ago.
Surprise.
This was a great leap for us, at the time. That was our first single-family home that we moved into.
The neighborhood was nice, nice house, nice backyard, nice landlords, everything was good.
Christina and Michael have a blended family, each with children from previous relationships. Their two eldest are Diamond and Jonathan.
It was an adjustment for both families, for the children to get to know each side, but they latched on real good.
Pizza time!
Christina's younger sister, Vanessa, is at their house almost every day, along with her 1-year-old son, Robert.
Vanessa and I hung out all the time. She was always there. She was always there for everybody. She was the glue. She would always be the one to organize parties. She threw me my first baby shower, and it was what, my 4th kid, and it's my first baby shower.
She made sure that the family stayed close. She wanted everybody to know each other really good, to grow up together.
In their new home in this nice, safe neighborhood, the Covingtons seem set to live happily ever after.
There was no conflict in the family, nobody argued.
Okay.
Everybody always saying I love you to each other.
Grab me some pizza, okay?
New neighbors are moving in.
Soon, a new family moves into the neighborhood.
Feels like home, eh?
Yeah, it does.
Ashley Berger and her fiancé, Matt.
I'll take those, yeah.
It took a little time for us to find, the perfect house. And then we did find one.
Do you take that?
And we saw it and we really liked it. And we decided that we wanted to move there.
Their eldest son, Jackson, is just starting middle school.
Jackson was 12. He was into wrestling, music. He liked football.
It's finally happening.
He was a really athletic child. When we moved to that house, it was like a new beginning and a fresh start for a brighter future.
It's exactly the kind of tightly knit clan the Covingtons were hoping would take the house next door. But in just a few months, both families will regret ever laying eyes on each other.
Should I take this one?
That tragedy lies down the road. Right now, the two families seem like they'll get along great.
I honestly was cool with it because they were a mixed family. They were an interracial family. She was black, he's white. They had beautiful kids. Their kids looked like my kids did.
The Berger family, they fitted in fine. It was just kids on that street. It was a kid across the street. It was kids a couple houses down. I had no problem with them.
Often taking extra shifts at the gym where he works, Michael is not around as much as he'd like to be.
During the time periods when you would have seen them most, like him maybe coming home from work or something like that, that was probably during the times when I'm already gone for work. We'd had limited interaction. I think we probably spoke maybe once.
Christina doesn't see much of the neighbors either.
I'm very private. I kept to myself. I was always gone over my mother's house or with my family.
Despite the distance, it seems Ashley's son Jackson is drawn to Christina's daughter, Diamond.
It was cute. That's all it was. It's cute. When he had a crush on her, that's all it could be, was cute. Nothing further would happen or was going to happen.
Diamond, come inside.
My mom was very, very strict. We weren't really allowed out front. Like, we were allowed to just stay in our backyard.
Christina prefers that Diamond and her brother play mostly with the family, especially her cousins, Del Monte and Trevor.
My nieces and my nephews, my family, they will always be over my house. That's who they play with.
So there's no getting together with the boy next door.
You guys come straight home after school today, okay?
All right.
Okay, thanks.
At the start of a new school year, kids from the street gather every day at the bus stop.
We used to have fun at the bus stop. We used to just talk about games and Pokemon and, you know, certain video games.
And there in the gang is Jackson.
He made a lot of friends. He had a lot of friends. Everybody liked him. Everybody got along with him.
According to the Covingtons, Jackson is looking for a special friend.
So one day he had asked me out.
Hey, Diamond.
Hi.
Do you want to go out?
I wasn't interested in dating anyone. Like, I was a complete tomboy. Like, I have 2 older brothers. Like, I like sports. I like to play basketball and football.
Hang out sometime or go to movies?
I'm like, no, I don't want to.
She was too young. She wasn't into boys at that time. She was like 11 or something.
Ashley Berger says the same thing about Jackson.
He was all about being outside and being active. He was all about hanging with his friends. He's only 12. He's not thinking about having a girlfriend and all that stuff.
I can't.
He was nice at first, and then it all changed when I told him, no, I wouldn't be your girlfriend, and I'm not interested.
Leave us alone.
Leave her alone.
He was just mean and harsh for no reason, and me and my brother, we're not fighters. When he started messing with me and my brother, we'd be sitting on the bus and he would sit in the seat behind us and like just pulling my brother's hood and just like picking on my brother.
But according to Ashley, it's Diamond who's messing with her son.
Diamond kept swinging her book bag and smacking him in the face. And he kept asking her to stop, and she wouldn't. He told her, you keep doing it, I'm gonna take your book bag. So she kept doing it, and he took it, and he said, I'm not gonna give it to you till we get back home.
Give it back!
When Christina came over to tell me about this incident, she was like very adamant that my son had started the whole fight.
What happened at school today, Jackson?
They kept on swinging their little strap from their bag and kept on hitting me.
Did you do this?
Yeah, we didn't mean to.
We'll let it go for this time, right?
Both Christina and Ashley want to solve the issue, but right from the start, they see things very differently. And it doesn't help that one troubling incident just leads to another.
day that he asked me out, I was like, no. And then like a week later, he threw a snowball at my face.
Mom!
Had like a nice mark all around here, and it was pretty swollen.
Oh my goodness. What happened? Who did this to you?
Jackson.
Oh.
My kids tell me everything. He had hit her in the face with a hard snowball. Her face was all red.
Does that hurt?
An issue between kids
Come with me.
is about to escalate into a problem between grown-ups.
Hello? Hello. We need to talk.
I told her I didn't want to make it into a you and die thing. You know, your son hit my child in the face with a snowball.
Are you sure Jackson did that to you?
Yeah.
I find that quite hard to believe.
I mean, I know he liked her and everything, but you can't be doing that. And we said our goodbyes. I went home and she shut her door.
The thing is, this polite talk hasn't resolved anything.
I knew my son very well. He's not a bully. He wasn't bothering anybody. I never had any complaints.
What did they do to you?
Already, it's hard to sort out the he said, she
It was
said,
his fault.
I know.
and the confusion is only going to grow.
It got out of control. Because of this bullying thing, 2 families was destroyed.
On a peaceful street in Euclid, Ohio, in their new house, Matt and Ashley are blessed with wonderful news.
We're having a baby.
Really?
But outside their happy walls, these parents are very worried about their son, Jackson. It looks like he's being bullied by the children next door.
At first, I just thought it was, just kids being kids. I didn't really feel like it was like anything serious, and I thought that maybe it would stop,
It was his fault.
I know, sweetie. I'm so sorry it's not.
But the Covingtons believe Jackson is the bully.
Diamond would not mess with anybody. Still don't mess with nobody to this day. She was too shy and too scared. She wasn't raised like I was. I didn't raise no fighters.
My son, he wasn't a fighter type. As we call, he wasn't hood enough. He wasn't hood enough to take this kid on.
Have they been bullying you for a while?
Yes.
Ashley feels the same way about her son.
I just know that he's a good kid, and he didn't have any reason to lie.
Okay. All right.
The Covingtons decide the best way to deal with this situation
Just stay away from him, okay?
is to make sure Diamond and Jonathan avoid Jackson.
We had a conversation with my parents, and she was just like, stay your distance, keep away. There should be no talking from here on out.
I mean it. Stay away from him.
But living so close, side by side, there's no way to avoid all contact. And that means ever-increasing friction.
Matthew was outside playing Frisbee with the kids, and the Frisbee accidentally went into Christina's yard. So Jackson ran over to get the Frisbee out of her yard. Christina came to the door and she said, "Get the out of here with that."
Hey! Get off my lawn!
I'm just wondering, like, what kind of person she is to talk to a child that way. It was an accident. It was a Frisbee. We decided, not to say anything because we had just moved over there and because that might, stir more trouble up. So we just left it alone.
Yeah, watch where you're throwing that thing.
But the Covingtons have a different story.
The little boy threw the Frisbee on purpose and hit Christina's baby. Yes. He was throwing it, at first he was hitting the boys with it, Christina's boys. And then the Frisbee wound up hitting the baby.
And the Covingtons also say that Christina never yelled at Jackson.
I don't yell at people's kids. I go talk to the parents. You can't yell at a person's kid. You know, that's their kid.
What are you looking at?
I would have talked to her instead of her child, and I don't yell at kids like that.
Yeah, you don't care.
Even the simple act of parking in a driveway ratchets up the tension between the families.
They would take their truck, roll it up on the tree line, and across, like, our grass into their driveway.
The driveway is so narrow. As soon as you get out, you're stepping on their lawn.
They were, like, trying to get a rise out of us, just to try to make us mad.
It ain't like it did it constantly. And they trip on that. It's just little things that really ticked them off, and I just didn't understand. They really hated us.
Matt decides to make sure the property line is crystal clear.
We had taken some long, like, tree branches, and we started, like, sticking them in the ground around our line. We thought that if they seen it, that they would, you know, get the idea, like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
What can I do? That's just another way of saying, don't step in our yard. How childish are they?
The bad blood between the two households continues to grow. Both sides claim the other's child won't stop the harassment.
You know, the name calling, it kept going. They kept, like, saying, like, nasty things to him.
He wanted to mess with my brother. We got called to the principal's office. That's when the whole attitude, like, just changed. It got pretty bad. Like, I wanted to transfer out of the school.
Hey, buddy.
They're picking on me.
He started going home telling his mom, like, fibs, telling him that we were picking on him because it was two of us against him. And he would say that we were, you know, throwing stuff at him and spitting on him and little stuff like that, which was so untrue.
She's calling me names. She's
No matter who you want to believe, it's clear that something troubling is happening between the kids.
Go and get her over here right now.
Yes, Mom. Unbelievable.
Ashley sends Jackson over to fetch Christina.
Hi.
Hey, my mom wants to talk to you.
Okay, I'll be over in a minute.
All right.
I'm like, well, hold on. Let me, you know, I got to get my kids situated. They just walked in the door. Tell your mother I'll be over there in a minute.
Christina is frustrated when Ashley doesn't answer the door. So when Matt appears, she decides to take the matter up with him.
Can I help you with something?
I'm like, I don't know what's up with your wife, but she wanted me to come over. I guess something happened on the bus. Do you know what's going on?
What the hell is going on here?
I see Christina, and
Stay away from my husband.
she's, like, doing all this, putting her hand in his face like this, you know, like real close. And he's just standing there like...
You asked me to come over here.
I asked you to come talk to me, not to him.
She comes out the house like, why are you talking to my man? I'm like, lady, you just sent for me, but you had an attitude, you know? And she's like, don't be talking to my man, you like him.
Been flirting with your husband?
Yeah, flirting with my husband.
Don't ever touch me.
I just did.
Don't ever touch me.
Get
I thought it was kind of weird.
You asked me to come over here?
Why would you talk to somebody that you don't really see instead of talking to the person who's always there?
You think I want to be in your face right now?
Once again, there's two very different sides to the story.
You know, she's getting mad and she's like taking little steps towards me. I said, don't put your hand in my face. Don't put your hand in my face. And she's still walking up on me. her hand touched me.
You're garbage! Out of my...
And then she just hit me. Rolled up her fist and punched me in my face. I had my 1-year-old in my hand. She just hit me and he fell out my hand, hit his head on the concrete, and my daughter Diamond came out and got him, and I'm sorry, I just started welling on her. That was my first one. You hit me with my son. Are you serious? You hit me with my son in my hand?
Get off of me! No! Stop it! Get off!
And I'm punching her in her face. I mean, some good punches.
Matt won't stand by while his neighbor assaults his pregnant wife.
He was like really, really mad because he didn't think that it was gonna go that far.
To Diamond, Matt's defense looks like a vicious attack.
Her husband grabbed my mother and like held her by both her arms, like held her back, and the lady got up and she started hitting my mom.
Stop it! Get off of me!
Compared to what's going to happen on this front lawn, even this fight will seem like child's play.
What the hell is your problem, man?
I didn't think that it would escalate the way it did later on.
It was kid stuff, like we were kids arguing. And it should have never just got to that point of anybody's life being taken over child arguments.
A case of childhood bullying has escalated into a fistfight between two mothers, Christina and Ashley. And Matt has come to his pregnant fiance's defense.
She said that she was going to call the police. Matt said, I'm calling the police because you just hit a pregnant woman.
And ran in the house and called the police.
Yeah, no, I'm really scared.
In fact, both families call the police.
I wanted to press charges like she made my son fall and hit his head on the concrete. I wanted that, first of all.
The neighbor! There's a big mark on his head.
Officers confront a barrage of accusations and countercharges.
And she's pregnant.
He's talking to me. He said that I might go to jail because I'm the aggressor, because she had a cut under her eye.
Ashley claims that Christina started the fight and denies hurting Christina's toddler son.
She told him that I knocked her baby out of her hand.
I just came to her house to speak to her and she hit me, which caused him to fall. Look at it.
And that the baby fell and hurt herself. So I said, no, that's not true. She threw her baby down so she could fight me.
She's crazy. She attacked me.
The police go back and forth, hearing both sides. But without firm evidence, they have no choice but to walk away.
There's nothing you can do.
They didn't do anything. Nobody did nothing.
She assaults me, and you guys do nothing.
Nobody's trying to step in and do anything. And I felt like it should have been taken care of right then and there.
I felt really helpless. I did everything that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to call the police, you're supposed to talk to the school, or talk to the parent. What else is there to do? What else was there really to do? Nothing. Nobody would help.
Law enforcement may be unable to do anything about the conflict, but Michael is itching to take it on.
I came rushing home. I mean, I was ready. I was ready to fight.
Come on!
I didn't need no boys with me. I didn't need nobody with me. I came home. I paced him out my driveway. I yelled. I said, man, come on outside. Let's handle this, me and you. I mean, you don't sit there and double team a woman out here. I mean, but he didn't want to come outside.
That's it. That's it, I'm done.
Big, don't. Don't open that door. Don't open the door.
And then Matt's like frustrated because it's like they keep on and on. It doesn't stop.
Don't open that door. Don't open that door.
Here.
It's not even worth it. Come on, babe.
Michael takes his frustration out on the makeshift fence.
Problems between us got worse. They're still making their threats.
You coward! Come on!
Now I'm getting trash thrown in my front yard, over the fence, in my backyard. They're still harassing my son.
Terrified. And the Covingtons are also feeling under attack.
I mean, he would get out his van, he'd be seeing me on my porch, and he'd just get out and say little ignorant stuff.
She would, call my sister names, calling her ugly and stuff, talking about her kids, talking about you and your white kids, and I should call the police, tell them that you kidnapped those kids anyway with those little white bastards.
But Ashley claims she is the victim of foul language and race baiting.
They would call me the B word a lot. Matthew was white, that's why they were always yelling racial slurs at him.
Man, I am not racist. My whole family is a rainbow. Everybody. No, my daughter, she's mixed. I'm not racist at all. Never been racist and never will be racist.
What some claim are innocent mistakes are viewed by others as aggressive intrusions.
Diamond, she would turn up in our driveway and...
Hey, get off my lawn.
And she would, drop her bike.
Come on, now get.
And she did that a few times, and they just kept trying to, find stuff that they could do to us to make us react.
On the other side of the driveway, Christina's large family, including her brother, rallies to protect their own.
Hey. What the hell is your problem, man? What's my problem? My lawn. You see my lawn?
My oldest brother, he was like, I ain't got nothing to lose. Come mess with me. Come mess with me.
Let you mind your business. I'm right here, my friend. I'm right here, my friend. Back away.
I told him, Spencer, I gotta live here. Don't start no trouble.
Walk away.
That's all that happened. Nothing else happened.
And the Covingtons say strange things are happening at night.
Sometimes it'd be 11 o'clock at night and the young man would come outside and just knock on our windows and just mess with us.
Daddy!
With Christina's husband working evening shifts, her sister Vanessa continues to spend a lot of time at the Covington home.
That's how Nessa was. She'd come from her house, catch the bus over to my house, and stay. Not just one night, probably for a whole week. That's how close we were. Sweetest person in the world. Pretty, too.
Hey!
The Burgers say they saw another side to Vanessa.
We had no peace. We couldn't go outside without them coming out and cussing at us and calling us names.
But Christina says that's just not true.
I've never saw Nessa fight. Never. Ever. I never even really saw her get mad.
The emergency calls never stop, but real help never comes.
You need to go to their house.
Do something about it.
Every time the police would come, they would usually leave. And they would come back after the police left, and it would continue on. It didn't stop.
Well, I never stopped calling the police. I kept calling the police because I wanted it on record. I kept calling the police because I didn't want to be the one wrong.
Both sides desperately want the fighting to stop, but there's no way out on this road to tragedy.
I was feeling like I wish I never moved in that house.
For exclusive footage, go to investigationdiscovery.com.
What are you talking about?
In Euclid, Ohio, a family feud is verging out of control.
This is ridiculous. They're the ones.
In my 33 years as a prosecutor, what I learned is that people can be very good to one another, and they can be also act unbelievably evil toward one another.
After many months of he said, she said, all the police can suggest is that the two families avoid each other as much as possible.
You guys need to be over there right now.
That doesn't always work when you're so close and you have such a confined condition. It's not that easy to stay away from each other. You're gonna cross paths at some time.
It's them over there that
It's like you can't escape because they're always right there. And if they're not there and you leave, when you come home, they're there, they're waiting for you to come so they can do more stuff, say more things.
We're gonna get through this.
had planned that my family was gonna come over and celebrate my birthday. I was turning 12 years old.
Christina doesn't want to leave Diamond and Jonathan to walk home by themselves from the bus stop. She asks her nephews, Del Monte and Trevor, to meet up with them.
And my cousins are very protective of me. Like they don't like when people mess with me.
Diamond and Jonathan may feel secure, but Jackson feels threatened.
Looks scary because these kids were older and bigger, and my son's only like 12. These kids are like 14, 17, 19.
The little boy was not happy about my cousins being there at all because they were older cousins, and my cousins are pretty tall and very athletic, so they're kind of like, you know, built in a way. So he was like really ahead of us walking home.
But again, Ashley's story doesn't match.
When they were at the bus stop, they were all waiting for them. They followed them all the way home, threatening to beat them up and do things to them. So I called the police, like I always do.
911, what is your emergency?
My son was walking from the bus stop with these two teenage boys just tried to jump him.
In the meantime, Christina's sister Vanessa joins her and Diamond to buy supplies for the party.
My mother, my aunt, and my aunt's son were on our way to the store. We were gonna go get a little outfit for my birthday party.
When we left, there was nobody in her driveway.
When they return from shopping, they find trouble waiting on their doorstep.
Then we come back, an hour later, my husband said the police was there, and he just said that they called the police talking about my nephew's was taunting her son. As soon as we pull up, 3 carloads of people pull up in her driveway.
Ashley's family, including Matt's mother, has rallied to her defense. Now it's like there's 2 armies facing off against each other.
Do you have a problem? What?
It's not really clear how things get out of hand or who sets it off. And like everything else in this story, there are 2 versions.
Then Christina's family, they're like taking steps into the yard, like they're about to, come in our yard.
Yeah, you can get off my lawn now.
Okay.
My sister's getting out, you know how close their driveways are, so she can't help but to step on their grass and get out.
And Matt was like, whoa, hold it. Don't come over here. Do not come on my property. Don't come over here.
And then next thing I know, it was like a group of people that came outside, and everyone was yelling at everyone.
The first thing you hear out of Vanessa's mouth, she's yelling at the top of her lungs, "Come outside, pregnant girl. We're gonna stomp the baby out of you." My mother, she looks at me, she was like, "Who is that?" I said, "Those are the neighbors."
Before we can even, get in front of the car, here come Matt coming out. And he just started going off on us.
They were just all out there yelling, and they're yelling racist things to them.
I'm like, you get out my sister's face. What is you doing? You a man. Why are you stepping up in my sister's face?
Michael watches from his porch, but instead of getting involved in the argument, he decides to handle it differently.
I chose to take the legal route. I chose to call the police, but that day, I kept getting cut off the phone. The 911 operators kept saying they couldn't hear me.
Michael also has problems hearing the operator, and so goes inside.
I was feeling scared. I was worried because now there's like a bunch of people over here and they're in my yard.
God was in my sister's face. He was like in her face, like he had his hand up about to punch my sister.
The shouting match is turning into a shoving match, and much, much worse.
It don't matter what people say. They'll know nothing until they're actually experiencing it themselves. Until you actually go through something, then you can say, well, I coulda, shoulda, woulda, but you don't know what you could do. You don't know what you're capable of until, you're in that situation.
What is your emergency?
After months of angry words and accusations, the feud on our street has reached the edge of disaster. And it doesn't stop.
Teenagers, kicking and fighting. Okay, 20 people fighting. Okay.
I see my sister arguing with Ashley Berger's mother. We're standing in the middle of her yard, and I'm trying to pull my sister away, like, come on.
In the midst of the chaos and confusion, a pregnant Ashley has gone to her kitchen and picked up a knife.
And I yell, like, everybody get the hell out of my yard. So Christina saw me.
She got a knife. I'm yelling at everybody that this lady got a knife.
I was just thinking, like, I had to get them off of me. Then I kept, thinking about my baby.
Meanwhile, all these people jumping me, pulling my hair, punching me in my face, while this lady got a knife. None of them didn't care. They just kept on fighting.
I was very scared. They're grabbing me. This is the only arm I have free. So I just swung my arm until they let go.
Michael Covington's horrified reaction is relayed to 911.
Get the ambulance here now, they just stabbed her. Man, get up here, please, now.
Okay, is this Helen Crystal?
Then he sees his sister-in-law stumble out from the crowd.
Vanessa comes out of their yard. I'm standing in my driveway, and she was holding her chest, and she was telling me, she just stabbed me.
Like, Nessa, what's wrong? She stabbed me. She stabbed me. What do you mean she stabbed you? And so Nessa just falls to the ground. She falls. I'm lifting up her shirt, and I'm seeing bubbles come out of this hole in her chest. Just bubbles. I'm holding her in my arms, and her body's getting heavy in my lap, and her eyes are going dead.
We do have a stabbing, also at that location.
Next thing I remember is the ambulance. The police finally had arrived, and they were just taking their slow time, kind of walking up to the house.
I do have a female down on the grass outside.
I guess they didn't know that someone had been injured.
She just died right there, man. She died right there. You just killed this girl in front of her son, in front of her family.
Vanessa McMorrick was 20 years old. Ashley Berger is arrested and charged with murder.
I don't know. I think I was just in shock. I couldn't believe that all that just happened. I never thought it would be me who was gonna, get arrested and be put in a police car.
That summer, Ashley gives birth to a baby girl while under house arrest. Then, 3 months later, she goes to trial. The Covington and Berger families both want justice. Each family has their own definition of what that means. And no surprise, Their lawyers paint very different pictures.
Ashley is probably the shyest human being I've ever had the pleasure of meeting, let alone representing. She was a charitable person, a caring person, a caregiving person.
I felt that she was a violent person based on the incident a few months before where she punched Christina Barkley in the face while Christina was holding a baby. And of course, then she's the one who went and got a knife in this incident.
The people that lived next door, they were aggressive, they were angry, and they were bullies.
They were raising children, they worked, and none of them had a criminal record in any way, shape, or form.
If anybody can prove that she was not defending herself from this big behemoth coming at her, that's ridiculous.
The injuries suffered by Vanessa showed the rage and hatred that Ms. Berger had toward her. She stabbed her 7 times. And if she's simply trying to defend herself, I think just showing the knife would have been enough. She didn't have to stab her once. But she stabbed her 7 times, and one of those stab wounds was 3 inches deep, which is the stab wound that caused her death.
Ashley is given 5 years for manslaughter.
You know, you don't think, you just get scared. You just try to protect yourself. That's all I was trying to do.
Only 5 years for killing somebody. Heat of passion. Heat of passion,
By the time Ashley is released from prison in 2010, her relationship with Matt has ended.
This is something that I wouldn't want anybody to go through what I went through. I'm trying to rebuild and, you know, do something good with my life. It's like when you're a felon, it's hard to get a second chance.
To this day, that the blood stain from my aunt is still on the porch. It's still on the porch because it was like it was under a rail.
The call came in just after dawn, the kind of call that patrol officers remember long after their careers are over. A quiet road outside a small Ohio town. Mist hanging low over frozen fields. A car sitting alone where it shouldn't be. Engine cold. Door slightly open. No driver in sight. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Just another abandoned vehicle on a rural stretch of highway. But within hours, that lonely car would ignite a mystery that would haunt investigators for decades. A case whispered about in break rooms. A name repeated in headlines. A question that refused to die. What happened that night in Ohio in 1998? The town of Brookhaven was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and people waved to strangers. Population just under 12,000. A cluster of brick storefronts, 2 diners, a courthouse with a clock tower that chimed every hour. Nothing about Brookhaven suggested it would become the center of a mystery that would stretch across generations. But on the morning of October 17th, everything changed. At 6:12 a.m., a truck driver traveling along County Road 44 spotted the car first. A dark blue sedan parked awkwardly along the shoulder near a line of bare trees. It hadn't been there during his route the night before. The passenger door was slightly ajar, rocking gently in the cold wind. He slowed down, looked again. Something felt wrong. He pulled over and stepped out. Frost crunched beneath his boots. The air smelled of wet earth and autumn leaves. The road was silent except for the distant hum of the highway miles away. Inside the car, the driver's seat was empty. Keys still in the ignition. A purse resting on the passenger seat. The truck driver didn't touch anything. He walked back to his cab and radioed it in. Within minutes, Brookhaven police dispatched a patrol unit. Officer Daniel Mercer arrived at 6:31 a.m. He was 28 years old, only 3 years on the force. He parked behind the sedan, lights flashing softly against the gray morning sky. He approached cautiously. The vehicle was registered to a 24-year-old woman named Emily Harper. Mercer checked the interior. Wallet inside the purse. Driver's license. Credit cards. Everything intact. But Emily Harper was nowhere to be found. No sign of a struggle. No footprints in the damp roadside grass that led anywhere meaningful. Just a silent car sitting alone in the cold. By 7:10 a.m., detectives were on scene. The discovery spread through Brookhaven quickly. In small towns, news travels faster than sirens. Within hours, people were whispering the same question over coffee counters and grocery aisles. Where was Emily Harper? She had been seen the night before at a bar called the Lantern Room, a low-lit spot near the town square where locals gathered on Friday nights. Friends said she left around midnight. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't upset. She simply said she was tired and heading home. Home was a 15-minute drive. She never made it. Detectives retraced her route. The Lantern Room sat downtown. Her apartment was on the north side of town, just beyond a cluster of quiet neighborhoods. County Road 44 wasn't part of the normal route. To reach that road, Emily would have had to turn off the main highway and drive nearly 5 miles into rural farmland.
Why?
Investigators searched the roadside for hours. They combed the ditches, the tree line, the open fields stretching toward the horizon. Nothing. No blood. No discarded clothing. No tire tracks that suggested another vehicle stopped nearby. Just empty land and the abandoned car. Inside the sedan, detectives found a few small details that only deepened the mystery. Emily's purse contained $27 in cash. Her pager, common in the late 90s, sat clipped inside. But her cell phone was missing. In 1998, cell phones were not yet universal, but Emily owned one. Friends confirmed she carried it everywhere. Yet it wasn't in the car. Detectives immediately requested phone records. Meanwhile, officers knocked on doors along County Road 44. The houses were scattered and far apart. Many residents had been asleep when Emily's car supposedly appeared during the night. One farmer reported hearing a car engine around 2 a.m. Another thought they saw headlights near the roadside around the same time. But no one saw Emily. No one heard a scream. No one saw another vehicle leaving. The timeline tightened like a noose. Emily left the bar around midnight. Her car appeared on County Road 44 sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. After that, nothing. No movement on her bank accounts. No calls from her phone. No sightings anywhere. It was as if she had vanished into the dark Ohio countryside. Within 24 hours, the case exploded across local media. Brookhaven woman missing. Police search rural road. Community fears foul play. Volunteers began searching fields and woods. Hundreds of people joined the effort.
Church groups.
High school students. Neighbors carrying flashlights and walking shoulder to shoulder across farmland. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs tracked Emily's scent from the car to the edge of the road and then lost it completely. It was as if she had gotten into another vehicle, or been forced into one. Detectives quietly began treating it as an abduction. But without a body, without witnesses, without clear evidence, the investigation moved slowly through shadows. Emily Harper wasn't a stranger in Brookhaven. She grew up there, graduated from Brookhaven High School in 1992, worked as a dental assistant at a small clinic downtown. Friends described her the same way every time. Friendly, reliable, quiet but warm. Not the kind of person who disappeared, which made the mystery even darker. Detectives started with the obvious. Boyfriends, co-workers, anyone who had argued with her recently. Her most recent relationship had ended months earlier. The ex-boyfriend was questioned and cleared. Co-workers reported nothing unusual. Family members insisted she had no enemies. But one detail lingered. At the Lantern Room that night, Emily had spoken briefly with a man witnesses couldn't fully identify. Some said he was tall. Others said he wore a baseball cap, pulled low. One bartender remembered them talking near the jukebox. But the bar had no cameras. And no one knew his name. Detectives tracked down every patron from that night they could identify. Most remembered nothing unusual, but one witness offered something strange. Around midnight, they saw Emily walk toward the parking lot. A man followed several seconds later. Not side by side. Not together. Just following. The description was vague.
Male. White.
Maybe mid-30s. Dark jacket. It was barely enough to build a sketch. Still, investigators circulated the description through surrounding counties. Nothing came back. Days turned into weeks. Search teams expanded beyond Brookhaven. Divers checked nearby lakes. Police searched abandoned barns. Nothing. Emily Harper had vanished. The case slowly cooled. Headlines faded. Tips slowed. Detectives moved on to other crimes. But the file never truly closed. Instead, it became something else. A phrase whispered inside police departments across America. A phrase that carries weight and frustration in equal measure. A cold case. Years passed. Then decades. New detectives inherited the file. Boxes filled with reports, photographs, witness interviews. The abandoned car. The missing phone. The man in the baseball cap. All frozen in time like evidence trapped in ice. Occasionally, the case resurfaced. An anonymous tip. A supposed sighting. Each lead investigated. Each one collapsing into nothing. For Emily's family, the silence was unbearable. No answers. No body. No justice. Just the constant echo of that question. What happened on County Road 44? By the early 2000s, Brookhaven had largely tried to move on. But some residents still remembered the night everything changed. The empty car. The flashing lights. The search parties crossing frozen fields. The town had never fully shaken the feeling that something terrible happened in the dark. Something unseen. Something that slipped away before anyone realized what was happening. Then, nearly 3 decades later, something unexpected happened. Something buried in the evidence room. Something microscopic. A fragment so small investigators in 1998 barely knew what to do with it. A strand of DNA. For 27 years, the mystery sat untouched. A silent file in a quiet Ohio police department. Until technology caught up with the past. And when it did, the cold case that haunted Brookhaven finally began to breathe again. For 27 years, the evidence box sat in a climate-controlled room inside the Brookhaven Police Department, sealed with aging tape and tagged with a fading label. Harper, Emily, missing person, October 1998. Officers walked past it every day without thinking much about it. New recruits barely recognized the name. The case had slipped into that strange category investigators know too well. Not solved, not forgotten, simply suspended in time. A cold case. One of dozens stacked on metal shelves that hummed softly under fluorescent lights. But evidence has a way of waiting patiently for the future. In early 2025, Detective Laura Kessler reopened the Harper file. She had joined Brookhaven PD a year earlier after spending a decade working homicide in Columbus. Cold cases were her obsession. The idea that a crime could sit unresolved for decades, that somewhere a killer might still be living an ordinary life, gnawed at her. One afternoon, she was reviewing unsolved disappearances across the county when Emily Harper's name surfaced again. 24 years old. Vanished after leaving a bar. Car found abandoned. No body. No suspect. Kessler had seen variations of that story before, but something about this one felt unfinished in a different way. The file wasn't thin. It was enormous. 4 thick binders stuffed with reports, witness interviews, search logs, maps, photographs. It looked like investigators had poured everything they had into the case back in 1998. And yet the ending was blank. Kessler spent the next 2 weeks reading every page. She studied photographs of the abandoned sedan, evidence diagrams showing where the car sat along County Road 44, the timeline built from interviews with bar patrons, the vague description of the mysterious man in the baseball cap. It was a haunting collection of fragments. But one detail kept pulling her back. A small notation inside the evidence inventory. Hair strand recovered, rear passenger seat. At the time, it hadn't meant much. In 1998, DNA technology existed but was limited and expensive. Laboratories prioritized violent crimes with bodies and obvious suspects. A single unidentified hair strand inside a missing person's car rarely made the cut. Back then, investigators had bagged it, logged it, and sent it to the state lab. The result came back inconclusive. Not enough markers for comparison. So the strand went into storage. Another silent artifact waiting in darkness. Kessler stared at the entry for a long time. Technology had changed dramatically since 1998. What once required large samples could now be done with microscopic traces. Entire cases had been cracked using DNA fragments smaller than a grain of sand. The most famous example had happened in California in 2018. Investigators had used genealogy databases to identify the Golden State Killer, a serial predator who had evaded capture for over 40 years. Kessler wondered if something similar might be possible here. She requested the evidence box. When it arrived at her desk, the cardboard looked almost fragile with age. Evidence tape yellowed at the edges. Old handwriting from detectives who had likely retired decades earlier. Inside were carefully sealed bags. Emily's purse. Photographs from the car. A cassette tape from the bar's jukebox playlist that night. And near the bottom, a tiny envelope labeled hair, passenger seat. Kessler held it up to the light. Inside was a single thin strand. It looked almost invisible. But sometimes the smallest things carry the loudest answers. She sent the sample to the state forensic lab with a request for modern DNA analysis. Then the waiting began. Weeks passed. Cold cases move slowly. Evidence has to be handled carefully, processed meticulously. Contamination risks are high with decades-old samples. Meanwhile, Kessler kept digging through the original investigation. The man in the baseball cap still bothered her. Witness descriptions were inconsistent, but the basic outline appeared again and again.
Tall.
White male. Dark jacket. Cap pulled low. Seen speaking with Emily near the jukebox. Seen walking toward the parking lot shortly after she left. After that, he disappeared. In 1998, investigators had tried to track him down, but the bar crowd that night had been large and transient. Many people came from neighboring towns. Some paid cash. Records were incomplete. By the time police started identifying patrons days later, the trail had already cooled. Still, Kessler wondered if modern technology might help reconstruct the scene. She requested archived phone records from the bar's landline, hoping maybe someone had called a taxi or placed a local call that night. She pulled old maps and cross-checked them with modern satellite imagery. County Road 44 looked almost identical to how it did in the photographs, a quiet stretch of rural pavement surrounded by farmland. But something else caught her attention. A small gravel access road branching off about half a mile from where Emily's car had been found. In 1998, it led to an abandoned farmhouse. The original investigators had searched it. Found nothing. Still, the thought lingered. Why had Emily driven that way at all? The route made no sense unless she was following someone. Or someone was following her. Then the phone rang. The forensic lab. Kessler felt a jolt of adrenaline before she even answered. The technician on the other end sounded cautious but excited. They had successfully extracted DNA from the hair strand. Not just partial markers, a full profile. Kessler leaned back in her chair. After 27 years, the evidence was finally speaking. But the real shock came next. The technician asked if she wanted the DNA uploaded to the National Criminal Database. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. If the sample matched someone already convicted of a crime, the system would flag it instantly. Kessler authorized the upload. Then she waited again. Sometimes the system responded within minutes. Sometimes weeks. 3 days later the alert arrived. But it wasn't the kind of match investigators expect. The DNA didn't match a convicted criminal. It matched a relative. A distant one. Third cousin level. Which meant the man whose hair had been inside Emily Harper's car likely had never been arrested before. But somewhere in the country, one of his relatives had submitted DNA to a genealogy database. And that was enough. The lab forwarded the information to a specialized genealogical analyst who began building a family tree. Thousands of names, branches stretching across multiple states, slowly narrowing, eliminating possibilities, cross-referencing ages, locations, historical records. Weeks passed. Then one name surfaced again, and again at the center of the tree. A man who had lived less than 30 miles from Brookhaven in 1998. A man who would have been 35 years old at the time. A man who, according to archived DMV records, drove through Brookhaven regularly for work. His name was Daniel Mercer. The room went quiet when Kessler read it. Because Daniel Mercer wasn't just anyone. He had been there the morning Emily's car was discovered. In fact, he had been the first officer on the scene. The same young patrolman who responded to the abandoned sedan at 6:31 a.m. The same officer who stood beside the car when the investigation began. Now, 27 years later, DNA evidence was whispering something investigators in 1998 never imagined. The hair strand inside Emily Harper's car belonged to him. The discovery sent a shockwave through the department. Mercer had retired 5 years earlier after a long career in law enforcement. Respected, trusted, known as a quiet, reliable officer. No disciplinary record, no history of violence. And yet his DNA was sitting inside the car of a missing woman whose disappearance he helped investigate. Kessler felt the weight of the moment, because cold cases rarely explode like this. But when they do, they reveal something deeply unsettling. Sometimes the truth has been standing at the scene all along, watching, waiting. And for 27 years, no one ever thought to look at the first officer who arrived that morning on County Road 44. Detective Laura Kessler read the lab report 3 times before she said anything out loud. The office around her hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant chatter of patrol radios, but inside her head there was only one sentence repeating again and again. Daniel Mercer, the first officer on scene. The same man whose DNA had now surfaced inside Emily Harper's abandoned car. For nearly 3 decades, Mercer had been part of the investigation. His original report from October 17, 1998 was still preserved in the first binder of the case file. His handwriting was neat, methodical, professional. The report described exactly what he saw when he arrived that morning on County Road 44. Vehicle stationary on shoulder. Passenger door partially open. No visible occupant. Purse located on front seat. No immediate signs of struggle. Back then, Mercer had been treated like any other responding officer, just a patrolman doing his job. No one had questioned his presence. In fact, he had helped secure the scene before detectives arrived. He was there when the first photographs were taken. He was there when the vehicle was towed. And for 27 years, nobody thought twice about it. Now, everything looked different. Kessler closed the file slowly and walked down the hallway to the office of Police Chief Harold Benton. Benton had been with the department even longer than Mercer. In fact, he had been a young detective when Emily Harper disappeared in 1998. He remembered the search parties, the media frenzy, the weeks of frustration as the investigation stalled. When Kessler handed him the DNA report, he read it in silence. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me," he said quietly, "that the hair inside her car belonged to one of our own officers?"
Kessler nodded.
"And not just any officer," Benton added slowly. "The one who found the car." Neither of them spoke for a moment. In small police departments, accusations like this carry a different weight. Everyone knows everyone. Careers overlap for decades. Officers attend each other's weddings, retirements, funerals. Daniel Mercer wasn't just a name in a file. He had spent 30 years wearing the same uniform. But evidence doesn't care about loyalty. Benton finally stood up and closed the office door. "Before we go any further," he said, "we need to be absolutely certain." Kessler agreed. One DNA sample was powerful, but it wasn't enough by itself to accuse a former officer of involvement in a disappearance. Contamination was always a possibility. After all, Mercer had been inside the car during the initial response. But that explanation raised another question. If the hair belonged to Mercer because he had examined the vehicle, why was it found in the rear passenger seat? According to the original scene report, Mercer never entered the back of the car. In fact, investigators at the time had been careful to document who touched what. Mercer had only leaned into the driver's side to check for identification before stepping back. The hair had been discovered later by a crime scene technician while vacuuming the rear seat, which meant Mercer's DNA had been there before the police ever arrived. Kessler requested the full forensic breakdown from the lab. The strand wasn't just any hair. It had a root attached. That meant it likely fell out naturally, not transferred through casual contact. Someone had been inside that back seat. Someone whose DNA matched Daniel Mercer. Chief Benton exhaled slowly as he absorbed the implications. Has anyone contacted him yet? No, Kessler said. Not until we know more. Mercer had retired in 2020. He was 63 now, living about 40 miles away in a quiet town called Ridgeway. According to public records, he lived alone in a small ranch-style house at the edge of a wooded subdivision. No criminal record. No known scandals. Just 3 decades of steady police work. On paper, he looked like the last person anyone would suspect in a cold case. But cold cases have a way of rewriting history. Kessler returned to her office and reopened the original investigation files. This time, she wasn't reading them as a missing person report. She was reading them as if Mercer might have been part of the story from the beginning. And almost immediately, small details began to stand out. In his original statement, Mercer said he had approached Emily's car from the driver's side. But in the evidence photos taken minutes later, the passenger door was already open. Had Mercer opened it? Or had it already been that way? His report didn't clarify. Another detail surfaced in the timeline. Mercer had been dispatched to the scene at 6:28 a.m. He arrived at 6:31. But the truck driver who reported the car said he placed the call at 6:12, which meant there was a 19-minute window between the discovery of the vehicle and Mercer's arrival. During that time, the car sat alone on the roadside, unattended, except for whoever might have been there before the truck driver passed by. Kessler leaned back in her chair. If Mercer's DNA was inside the back seat before the police arrived, there were only 2 possibilities. Either Mercer had been in the car sometime earlier, or someone had planted evidence that connected him to the scene. Both possibilities were disturbing. But the deeper she dug into Mercer's background, the more unsettling the picture became. His patrol route in 1998 had covered the northern edge of Brookhaven, including County Road 44. According to archived dispatch logs, Mercer had worked the late shift the night Emily disappeared. He clocked out at 2:15 a.m., just 15 minutes after a local resident reported hearing a car engine near the roadside where Emily's vehicle was eventually found. That timeline alone didn't prove anything, but it tightened the margins. Kessler requested Mercer's personnel file. It was thick, decades of evaluations, commendations, routine paperwork. Nothing alarming jumped out at first. But buried deep in the early years of his career was a curious entry. In 1996, Mercer had been briefly investigated for inappropriate conduct during a traffic stop. A female driver reported that he had lingered beside her car longer than necessary, asking personal questions and making her uncomfortable. The complaint was eventually dismissed due to lack of evidence. Still, it was there. A small footnote in an otherwise clean career. Kessler made a note. Then she returned to the most important question. Why was Mercer's DNA inside Emily Harper's car? To answer that, investigators needed something even stronger than genealogy. They needed a direct DNA sample from Mercer himself. But obtaining it wouldn't be simple. Because if Mercer was innocent, asking for his DNA could destroy the reputation of a retired officer who had spent his life serving the community. And if he wasn't innocent, then the Brookhaven Police Department might be facing a truth far darker than anyone had imagined. Chief Benton called a closed meeting the next morning. Only 3 people were present: Benton, Kessler, and the county prosecutor. The conversation was blunt. If Mercer's DNA matched the hair strand definitively, the case would shift from missing person to potential homicide investigation. But first they needed confirmation. The prosecutor suggested a quiet approach. No accusations. No warrants. Just a casual interview with Mercer under the pretense of reopening the Harper case. During the conversation, investigators could collect a discarded item, a coffee cup, a water bottle, anything that might contain his DNA.
It was a standard technique.
But it carried enormous risk. Because if Mercer had something to hide, even the slightest hint of suspicion might send him running. Or worse. Later that evening, Detective Kessler stood outside the evidence room again. The Harper file sat open in her hands. Photographs from 1998 spilled across the desk. The abandoned car, the empty road, the mist rising over the fields that morning. For nearly 3 decades, Emily Harper had existed as a ghost in the town's memory. A missing woman. A mystery that refused to fade. Now the investigation was pointing somewhere no one expected. Toward the man who had been there at the very beginning. The first officer to arrive. The one who looked into the empty car. The one who wrote the first report. Daniel Mercer. And if the DNA told the truth, the cold case that haunted Brookhaven might have been standing in uniform the entire time. The decision to approach Daniel Mercer was made quietly, almost cautiously, as if the very act of speaking his name too loudly might crack something fragile inside the department. For decades, Mercer had been part of Brookhaven's identity. He had walked those streets in uniform while children rode bicycles down quiet sidewalks and shop owners closed their stores at dusk.
People trusted him.
They waved when his patrol car rolled past. Some even remembered the night he knocked on their doors during the search for Emily Harper. Now that same man was about to become the center of the investigation he once helped lead. Detective Laura Kessler reviewed the plan with Chief Benton and the county prosecutor late that evening. Nothing dramatic. No squad cars. No warrants. Just a simple visit under the pretense of reviewing old details from the 1998 disappearance. If Mercer agreed to talk, great. If he declined, that was fine too. The real goal was something else entirely. A discarded DNA sample. Something simple. A coffee cup, a glass of water, even a cigarette, but if he happened to smoke. Anything that could be legally collected once abandoned. The lab could compare it directly to the hair strand found in Emily's car. If it matched, the case would shift instantly from speculation to evidence. But if it didn't match, the entire theory collapsed. 2 days later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, Kessler and another investigator, Detective Mark Alvarez, drove west toward Ridgeway. The road cut through long stretches of farmland and small wooded patches. The same kind of quiet landscape that surrounded County Road 44. Fields that looked peaceful from a distance, but could swallow secrets without leaving a trace. Mercer's house sat near the edge of a modest neighborhood. Single-story ranch homes, trimmed lawns, mailboxes leaning slightly toward the road. Nothing remarkable. The kind of place retired police officers often settle into after long careers. Kessler parked along the curb. For a moment, neither detective spoke. Then Alvarez exhaled. "You ready for this?"
Kessler nodded.
They walked up the driveway and knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened slowly. Daniel Mercer stood there wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was gray now, thinner than in the photographs from the 1990s. His face carried the worn calm of someone who had spent years dealing with other people's problems. For a brief moment, he looked exactly like what he had always been, a retired cop enjoying a quiet afternoon. "Can I help you?" Mercer asked. Kessler introduced herself and Alvarez. The moment she mentioned Brookhaven Police Department, Mercer's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Haven't seen anyone from there in years," he said. "We're reviewing some older cases," Kessler explained. "One in particular from 1998. Mercer leaned against the doorframe, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Emily Harper," he said. The detectives exchanged a quick glance. "Yes," Kessler replied. Mercer stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and old books. A television murmured quietly in the living room. Framed photographs lined the walls, police academy graduation, department award ceremonies, retirement parties. 3 decades of service captured in pictures. Mercer motioned toward the kitchen table. "You want coffee?" he asked. Kessler felt a quiet pulse of anticipation. "That'd be great," she said. Mercer turned toward the counter and poured 2 mugs from a half-full coffee pot. He placed them on the table and sat down across from the detectives. The conversation began casually. Kessler asked Mercer what he remembered about the morning Emily Harper's car was discovered.
He didn't hesitate.
Dispatch sent me out after a truck driver called in an abandoned vehicle, he said. County Road 44. Early morning. Still dark when I got there. His memory was remarkably clear. He described pulling up behind the sedan, checking the driver's side window, noticing the purse on the seat, opening the door slightly to look inside. Every detail matched his original report almost perfectly. Kessler watched him carefully. His tone was calm, steady. No visible nervousness. You went inside the vehicle at all? She asked. Mercer shook his head.
No.
Just leaned in enough to see if there was ID. You never entered the back seat?
No.
The answer came quickly, almost automatically. Kessler nodded slowly and took a sip of coffee. The mug was warm in her hands. Mercer continued talking about the early hours of the investigation, the search parties, the helicopters, the frustration when no leads appeared. That case bothered everyone, he said quietly. A young woman just gone. He paused for a moment. You ever figure out what happened? Kessler set the mug down. Not yet. Mercer leaned back in his chair. Well, he said, I hope you do someday. The conversation lasted another 15 minutes. Then the detectives thanked him and stood to leave. Mercer walked them to the door. Strange thing about that case, he said as they stepped outside. Sometimes people just vanish. You search everywhere, and they're still gone. Kessler nodded politely. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mercer. As they walked down the driveway, Mercer closed the door behind them. Neither detective spoke until they reached the car. Then Alvarez looked at the coffee mug in Kessler's hand. You bringing that with us? She nodded. Inside the mug, a faint ring of dried coffee clung to the rim. More than enough for DNA extraction. The sample was sent to the lab that same evening. This time the weight felt heavier, because now there was a real person behind the evidence, not just a name in a file. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th morning, Kessler's phone rang. The forensic analyst sounded almost breathless. We ran the comparison, he said. And there was a brief pause. It's a match. The room seemed to shrink around her. The DNA profile from Daniel Mercer's coffee cup matched the hair strand recovered from Emily Harper's car. 100%. Statistically impossible to be anyone else. For 27 years, the answer had been sitting quietly inside the evidence box. And now it pointed directly at the first officer who arrived on scene. Chief Benton stared at the lab report in disbelief. Jesus, he whispered. No one spoke for several seconds, because the implication was enormous. Daniel Mercer had been inside Emily Harper's car before police ever arrived, which meant he had either encountered her that night or encountered the car after something happened. But there was another detail in the forensic report that made the situation even more disturbing. The hair strand from the rear seat wasn't the only biological evidence found in the vehicle. In 1998, investigators had also collected a faint smear from the inside door handle of the back passenger door. At the time, the sample was too degraded for analysis. Now, with modern technology, the lab had tested it again. The result came back just hours earlier, and the DNA profile matched Emily Harper. The discovery changed everything, because it meant Emily had been inside the back seat of her own car, injured, bleeding. And Daniel Mercer's hair was found right beside where that blood had been. The cold case was no longer just a disappearance. It was almost certainly a violent crime. Chief Benton closed the report slowly. What's Mercer doing right now? He asked. Kessler checked her notes. Living quietly in Ridgeway. Same house. Benton nodded grimly. For 27 years, he said, that man helped wear the same badge we do. Outside the station, Brookhaven continued its normal routines. Cars passed through town square. Children walked home from school. The courthouse clock chimed the hour just as it had in 1998. But inside the police department, the Emily Harper case had just transformed from a mystery into something far more dangerous. because now investigators had evidence tying a retired officer to the last place she was ever seen alive. And if Daniel Mercer knew what happened that night on County Road 44, he had been keeping that secret for nearly 3 decades. The confirmation of the DNA match changed the atmosphere inside the Brookhaven Police Department almost overnight. What had once been a quiet cold case file gathering dust in the evidence room was now the center of a rapidly escalating investigation. The name Daniel Mercer, once spoken with casual familiarity among officers who had worked beside him for decades, suddenly carried a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Detective Laura Kessler stood in the briefing room as Chief Benton laid the situation out to a small circle of investigators and the county prosecutor. The blinds were drawn. The door was closed. No one outside that room knew what had just been discovered. "Let's be clear," Benton said, placing the lab report on the table. "This doesn't prove Mercer killed Emily Harper, but it proves something else just as important." He tapped the page. He lied. The room remained still, because Mercer had stated clearly during the interview that he never entered the back seat of Emily's car. Yet his DNA had been found there, right beside Emily's blood. That contradiction alone was enough to push the case into a completely different category. The prosecutor leaned forward. If Mercer was inside that vehicle before police arrived, he either encountered Harper during the event or he was present after the event. Either way, Alvarez added quietly, he was part of the scene. Kessler opened another file. Since the DNA confirmation, she had started rebuilding the timeline of Mercer's movements the night Emily disappeared. In 1998, investigators had focused on witnesses from the bar, friends, and potential strangers passing through town. Mercer had never been scrutinized because he was part of the responding team. But now his schedule mattered more than anyone else's. According to archived dispatch records, Mercer had been working the evening patrol shift on October 16th. His shift ran from 6 p.m. until 2 a.m. Emily Harper left the bar around midnight. Her car appeared on County Road 44 sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Mercer officially clocked out at 2:15 a.m. That narrow window suddenly looked much more important. Kessler projected a map onto the briefing room screen. Mercer's patrol zone that night included the north side of Brookhaven, the same area where Emily lived, and the same roads leading toward County Road 44. If Mercer encountered Emily while she was driving home, he would have had the authority to pull her over without raising suspicion. A routine traffic stop. A flashing light in the rearview mirror. Something every driver instinctively obeys. The theory hung in the air. But theories alone weren't enough. Investigators needed proof that Mercer had been near Emily that night. Kessler began combing through every surviving piece of evidence from 1998. Old dispatch tapes. Handwritten patrol logs. Even radio transcripts stored on fragile cassette recordings. Most of the audio was routine chatter, license plate checks, noise complaints, small incidents typical of a quiet town. But one transmission stood out. At 12:41 a.m., Mercer radio dispatched to report a vehicle stop near the intersection of Millbrook Avenue and State Route 9. That location was less than 2 miles from the Lantern Room, the bar Emily left shortly before midnight. Kessler replayed the recording several times. Mercer's voice sounded calm and ordinary. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Conducting a routine stop. White sedan. Plate number unreadable at the moment." The dispatcher acknowledged. Then the tape continued. At 12:44 a.m., Mercer cleared the stop. Driver warned and released. That was it. 3 minutes. No vehicle description. No recorded license plate. In modern policing, that kind of vague report would raise questions immediately. But in 1998, small-town patrol documentation was far less strict. Kessler leaned closer to the speaker. "White sedan," she murmured. Emily Harper drove a dark blue sedan. But under the dim streetlights of a rural road, color could easily appear lighter, especially on an older patrol radio transmission. The next piece of the timeline appeared 40 minutes later. At 1:28 a.m., Mercer called dispatch again. This time the recording was brief. Unit 12 checking out along County Road 44. No explanation. No incident. Just a location check. The same road where Emily's car would later be discovered abandoned. The briefing room grew quiet again, because the timeline was beginning to align in a way no one had noticed before. Emily leaves the bar around midnight. Mercer stops a sedan near her route home at 12:41 a.m. 40 minutes later, he reports being on County Road 44, the road where her car eventually appears. Kessler spoke slowly. If Mercer stopped Emily that night, he could have directed her to pull onto County Road 44. The prosecutor nodded. A secluded road. No witnesses. Minimal traffic. And Mercer would have had complete authority. A police officer asking a driver to follow him to another location wouldn't have seemed suspicious. Especially in 1998. Alvarez flipped through another stack of documents. Search teams combed that road for weeks, he said. If something happened there, they would have found signs. Kessler shook her head slightly. Not necessarily. She pulled out one more photograph from the evidence file. It showed the interior of Emily's car, the back seat where the hair strand and blood had been found. In the original report, investigators noted that the blood smear was small, less than 2 centimeters wide, barely visible, not enough to suggest a fatal injury inside the vehicle, which raised a chilling possibility. Emily may have been injured in the back seat, but the real violence could have happened somewhere else. Chief Benton folded his arms. If Mercer attacked her on that road, he said slowly. Where did he take her? No one had an answer. County Road 44 stretched through miles of farmland and wooded patches. In 1998, many of those properties were abandoned or rarely visited. Search teams had checked dozens of locations. But even the most thorough searches can miss things, especially when time passes. Kessler stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Brookhaven looked exactly the same as it always had. Quiet streets, brick storefronts, a town that believed it understood its own history. But sometimes the truth hides behind familiar faces. Daniel Mercer had spent nearly 3 decades wearing a badge in this community, helping investigate crimes, testifying in courtrooms, protecting the same streets where Emily Harper disappeared. If he was involved in her disappearance, it meant something far more disturbing than a single crime. It meant the investigation itself had been contaminated from the very beginning. Evidence could have been overlooked. Witness statements misdirected. Critical details buried. The prosecutor broke the silence. Right now we have 2 solid facts, he said. Mercer's DNA was inside the back seat of Emily Harper's car, and Emily's blood was found beside it. He paused. That's enough to bring him in for questioning. Chief Benton nodded slowly. But Kessler wasn't fully satisfied yet, because there was still one detail that refused to fit neatly into the timeline. The truck driver who discovered Emily's car reported it at 6:12 a.m. Mercer arrived at 6:31 a.m. But the farmer who lived nearby said he heard a car engine around 2 a.m. That meant Emily's vehicle had likely been sitting on that roadside for hours before it was discovered. And Mercer had been on that exact road at 1:28 a.m. If he had encountered Emily there, if something happened between them, then he had almost 4 hours before the car was reported. 4 hours where no one knew where he was. 4 hours where anything could have happened. Later that evening, Kessler sat alone in the evidence room again. The Harper case box was open in front of her. Photographs spilled across the table like frozen moments from a forgotten night. She studied one picture carefully. The abandoned car sitting beneath bare trees. Passenger door slightly open. A quiet rural road stretching into darkness. 27 years earlier, Daniel Mercer had stood beside that exact vehicle wearing a police uniform. He wrote the first report. He described the scene. He helped shape the narrative that investigators followed for decades. Now the evidence suggested something terrifying. The man who documented the crime scene might have been the one who created it. And if that was true, then the disappearance of Emily Harper wasn't just a mystery. It was a secret hidden in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. And the man who held that secret was still alive. The weight of the new evidence pressed down on every step the investigation took after that. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Emily Harper had been treated as a tragic mystery, something unexplained but distant, a story that faded slowly into local folklore. Now it had returned with teeth. And the deeper investigators looked into Daniel Mercer, the more unsettling the timeline became. Detective Laura Kessler began reconstructing Mercer's movements hour by hour on the night of October 16, 1998. The old dispatch tapes gave them pieces of the puzzle, but those recordings were incomplete. Patrol officers back then didn't log every moment of their shifts. Long stretches of time could pass with no radio traffic at all, which meant Mercer's exact whereabouts between calls were largely unknown. But Kessler knew something else about police officers. They leave behind records in ways they rarely think about. Fuel receipts, maintenance logs, parking tickets written to other drivers, court filings tied to arrests. Even the smallest piece of paperwork could anchor a timeline. She pulled Mercer's patrol logs from the department archive. The pages were yellowed with age, but still readable. Most entries were routine, noise complaints, minor traffic stops, welfare checks. Then she noticed something unusual. The log for the early hours of October 17th had a blank gap. From 12:50 a.m. until 1:28 a.m., there was no recorded activity at all. 38 minutes. In a busy city, that might mean nothing. But in a small patrol zone like Brookhaven's North District, officers usually documented something during that span, patrolling neighborhoods, checking businesses, responding to minor calls. Mercer's log simply skipped ahead to the moment he radioed dispatch from County Road 44. Kessler stared at the gap. 38 minutes. Enough time to pull someone over. Enough time for an argument to escalate. Enough time for violence. But still, it was circumstantial. The real breakthrough came from a source no one expected. 3 days after the DNA confirmation, the Brookhaven Police Department released a carefully worded statement announcing that the Emily Harper case had been reopened due to new forensic developments. They didn't mention Mercer by name. The goal was simply to encourage anyone with old information to come forward. The response was immediate. Phones began ringing within hours. Most calls were useless, rumors, half-remembered stories, people convinced they saw something decades earlier, but unable to provide real details. Then, on the second afternoon, one call stood out. The woman on the line introduced herself as Linda Carver. In 1998, she had worked as a waitress at a late-night diner called Silver Grill, located along State Route 9 just outside Brookhaven. The diner closed years ago, but Carver said something about the news coverage had stirred a memory she hadn't thought about in decades. Detective Kessler met her that evening. Carver was in her early 60s now, but her memory seemed sharp. She leaned forward across the small interview table and spoke slowly. "I don't know if this means anything," she said, "but I remember a police officer coming into the diner that night." Kessler asked her what time. Carver frowned slightly, thinking. After 2 in the morning. Maybe closer to 3. That detail immediately caught Kessler's attention. Mercer's shift ended at 2:15 a.m. "What do you remember about him?"
Kessler asked.
Carver hesitated. He looked off. Off how? Agitated, she said. Like something had happened. According to Carver, the officer came in alone and sat at the counter. He ordered black coffee but barely drank it. Instead, he kept glancing toward the windows and rubbing his hands together. At the time, she assumed he had just come from a stressful call. But there was something else she remembered. Something stranger. He had dirt on his uniform, she said quietly. Kessler looked up. Dirt.
Yeah.
On the knees. Like he'd been kneeling somewhere. Carver hadn't thought much of it in 1998. Police officers often dealt with messy situations. But now, hearing the case mentioned again after so many years, the image had resurfaced in her mind with uncomfortable clarity. "Did you recognize the officer?"
Kessler asked.
Carver nodded slowly. "I did later." She slid a printed photograph across the table. It was a copy of Daniel Mercer's old department portrait from the late 1990s. Carver studied it for only a second. "That's him." The statement added another piece to the growing timeline. If Mercer had been in the diner around 3 a.m., it meant he was still driving around long after his shift technically ended. And Silver Grill sat less than 5 miles from County Road 44. Close enough to reach in minutes. Kessler thanked Carver and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky above Brookhaven was dark and quiet, the same kind of rural silence that surrounded the town the night Emily disappeared. The investigation was starting to paint a clearer picture now. Emily leaves the bar around midnight. Mercer stops a vehicle matching her route at 12:41 a.m. Mercer later reports being on County Road 44 at 1:28 a.m. His patrol log contains a mysterious gap of nearly 40 minutes. Around 3 a.m., he appears at a diner nearby with dirt on his uniform and an agitated demeanor. Then, 3 hours later, he becomes the first officer to respond when Emily's abandoned car is reported. Kessler returned to the station and spread the timeline across the conference table. Chief Benton studied it carefully. If Mercer attacked her, he said quietly, he had hours to hide the body. The word body hung heavily in the room. Because until now, Emily Harper had technically been classified as a missing person. But the evidence was pointing towards something far darker. The blood in the back seat. The hidden DNA. The suspicious timeline. Every piece suggested that Emily had not simply disappeared. Something violent had happened. And if Mercer was responsible, the biggest question remained unanswered. Where had he taken her? County Road 44 ran through a maze of farmland and wooded tracts. In 1998, many of those properties were unoccupied. Some had been searched during the initial investigation, but technology at the time was limited. Ground-penetrating radar, modern cadaver dogs, and high-resolution aerial mapping were tools that investigators barely had access to back then. Now those tools were available. The prosecutor authorized a new round of searches. But before they could begin, investigators needed to confront the man at the center of it all, Daniel Mercer. Because there was one detail about the timeline that bothered Kessler more than anything else. When she and Alvarez visited Mercer's house earlier that week, he had spoken about the Emily Harper case with surprising calm, almost rehearsed. He remembered the scene perfectly. The abandoned car, the purse on the seat, the quiet road at dawn. Yet he had never mentioned something that was clearly documented in the original file. The passenger door had already been open when he arrived. That detail meant someone else had been inside the vehicle shortly before the truck driver discovered it. Someone who might have been searching for something. Or removing something. Kessler replayed Mercer's interview in her mind. He had answered every question quickly. Almost too quickly. Especially when she asked about the back seat. No hesitation.
No.
I never entered the back seat. Now, the DNA evidence proved that statement was false, which meant Mercer had deliberately lied. The question was why. Had he panicked when confronted? Or had he been hiding the truth for 27 years? Late that night, Kessler stood again beside the evidence photographs from 1998. The car. The road. The silent tree lines stretching into darkness. She imagined the moment Emily Harper's car pulled onto County Road 44. A patrol vehicle behind her. Flashing lights reflecting off the pavement. A routine stop that turned into something else entirely. Something violent. Something that ended with a young woman bleeding in the back seat of her own car. And somewhere in that darkness stood a police officer who would later return at dawn wearing the same uniform, writing the first report, guiding the investigation away from himself. For nearly 3 decades, Daniel Mercer had lived quietly with that secret. But the past has a way of resurfacing. Sometimes through witnesses. Sometimes through forgotten records. And sometimes through a single strand of DNA that waited patiently in an evidence box until science finally caught up. Now the investigation was approaching a moment that could change everything. Because the next time detectives knocked on Daniel Mercer's door, they wouldn't be asking polite questions about old memories. They would be asking about blood, about lies, and about what really happened to Emily Harper on County Road 44 in the early hours of October 17, 1998. By the time investigators prepared to confront Daniel Mercer again, the air inside the Brookhaven Police Department had shifted into something heavier than a typical criminal investigation. This was no longer just about solving a disappearance. It was about confronting the possibility that one of their own had hidden behind the badge for nearly 30 years. Detective Laura Kessler stood at the evidence board in the conference room early that morning. Photographs, maps, and timelines stretched across the wall like a web connecting the past to the present. Emily Harper's smiling photo sat at the center. Around it were the pieces investigators had assembled in the last few weeks: the hair strand from the back seat, the blood smear on the door handle, the dispatch recordings, the diner witness, the unexplained gaps in Mercer's patrol log. Every line pointed back to the same man, Daniel Mercer. The prosecutor reviewed the evidence one final time. "Right now," he said, tapping the board, "we can prove Mercer lied about being inside the car. We can place him near the location where it was found. And we have a witness who saw him hours later acting suspicious."
He paused.
"But we still don't have Emily." That fact weighed heavily on everyone in the room. Without a body, prosecutors often face enormous challenges in court. Jurors want certainty. They want physical proof of what happened. Right now, the case pointed toward Mercer with increasing intensity, but the final piece was still missing. Where was Emily Harper? Chief Benton spoke quietly. "Maybe Mercer will tell us." The plan was simple. They would bring Mercer in for a formal interview at the station. No accusations yet, just a conversation. But this time the detectives would confront him with the DNA evidence and watch his reaction. Because sometimes the truth reveals itself not through words, but through silence. Later that afternoon, 2 investigators drove back to Ridgeway. The same quiet neighborhood, the same modest house. This time the mood felt different. When they knocked, Mercer answered the door again, but his expression tightened slightly when he saw them. "Back already?" he said. Kessler kept her tone calm. "Mr. Mercer, we'd like to ask you a few additional questions about the Harper case. Would you be willing to come down to the station with us?" Mercer studied their faces for a moment. He had spent decades as a police officer. He understood what a second interview meant. Still, after a brief pause, he nodded.
"Sure."
The drive back to Brookhaven passed mostly in silence. Mercer stared out the window while farmland slid by under the fading afternoon sun. His expression was unreadable. At the station, they escorted him into a small interview room. The same kind of room Mercer himself had used countless times during his career. A table, 3 chairs, a recorder sitting in the center. Kessler pressed the record button. Today's date is June 14th, 2025. This is Detective Laura Kessler conducting an interview with Daniel Mercer regarding the disappearance of Emily Harper. Mercer nodded calmly. The conversation began slowly, almost casually. Kessler asked Mercer to walk through his memory of October 16th and 17th again. He repeated much of what he had said before: the call about the abandoned car, his arrival at the roadside, the purse on the seat, the quiet morning air. Then Kessler slid a photograph across the table. It showed the interior of Emily's car, specifically the back seat. "Earlier you told us you never entered the rear of the vehicle," she said. Mercer nodded. "That's right." Kessler leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mercer, we tested a hair strand recovered from this seat." Mercer's eyes flickered briefly toward the photo, then back to her. "The DNA from that strand matches you." The words hung in the air. For the first time since the interview began, Mercer's posture changed. Just slightly. His shoulders stiffened. "That's impossible," he said quietly. Kessler slid another document across the table. "The forensic report." "It's not impossible," she said. "It's confirmed." Mercer stared at the paper, but didn't pick it up. "I leaned into the car," he said after a moment. "Maybe it fell then." "You told us you never entered the back seat." "I didn't." Kessler didn't raise her voice. "But your DNA was found there." Mercer rubbed his hands together slowly. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the faint hum of the recorder. Then Kessler delivered the next piece. "We also tested a blood sample recovered from the rear door handle." Mercer looked up. "The blood belongs to Emily Harper." His face remained still, but something behind his eyes shifted. The prosecutor spoke next. "Mr. Mercer, that means Emily was bleeding in the back seat of her own car." Another silence. Then Mercer leaned back in his chair. "People get hurt during accidents," he said. "Was there an accident on County Road 44 that night?"
Kessler asked. "No."
"Did you pull Emily Harper over?"
"No."
The answers came quickly again, but this time they felt sharper, more defensive. Kessler reached into the file and pulled out a transcript. Dispatch records show you stopped a sedan near Millbrook Avenue at 12:41 a.m. Mercer frowned. That was a different driver. Do you remember their name?
No.
The license plate?
No.
Why wasn't it recorded? Mercer shifted slightly in his chair. It was a warning stop. Kessler nodded slowly. Then she placed another photograph on the table. This one showed the Silver Grill diner from 1998. A waitress remembers seeing you around 3 a.m. that morning, she said. Mercer blinked. I used to stop there sometimes. She said you had dirt on your uniform. Mercer shrugged. I worked outside. Another pause. Then Kessler spoke softly. Daniel, if something happened that night, this is your chance to explain it. For several seconds, Mercer said nothing. The room seemed to shrink around him. Finally, he leaned forward. Nothing happened, he said.
His voice was calm again.
Controlled. Emily Harper disappeared. I found the car. That's all. Kessler studied him carefully. The calmness felt almost rehearsed, as if he had practiced these answers long ago. The interview continued for another 40 minutes. Every time detectives pressed him with evidence, Mercer repeated the same responses. He denied pulling Emily over, denied being in the back seat, denied any involvement in her disappearance. Eventually, the prosecutor ended the session. Mercer stood up slowly. So, am I under arrest? He asked. Not today, Kessler said. Mercer nodded once. Then he walked out of the room. But something about the interview stayed with Kessler long after he left. Because during one brief moment, when she mentioned the blood in the back seat, Mercer's expression had changed. Just for a fraction of a second.
Fear.
Not anger. Not confusion.
Fear.
As if that single piece of evidence had struck closer to the truth than anything else they said. Later that evening, Kessler replayed the interview recording alone. She listened carefully to every pause, every shift in Mercer's voice. Then she noticed something subtle. When Mercer denied pulling Emily over, he always said the same phrase. I never stopped Emily Harper. Not, I didn't stop that car. Not, I didn't pull anyone over. Always her name. Emily Harper. Almost as if he was separating the person from the event. Kessler leaned back in her chair. Sometimes suspects reveal more in the way they speak than in what they actually say. And Mercer had spent decades interrogating people himself. He knew how these conversations worked, which meant if he slipped, even slightly, it might expose something deeper. Something hidden beneath years of careful silence. Outside the station, the night settled over Brookhaven again. Street lights flickered on. Cars passed quietly through town. Life moved forward like it always had. But somewhere out there, Daniel Mercer had just walked away from an interview where detectives laid out the first pieces of evidence tying him to the disappearance of Emily Harper. And if Mercer truly knew what happened that night in 1998, he was still carrying the answer. Still protecting the secret of what happened on County Road 44. And somewhere beyond the quiet farmland surrounding Brookhaven, the truth about Emily Harper might still be waiting to be discovered. After the interview, Daniel Mercer walked out of the Brookhaven Police Department the same way he had walked out of countless buildings during his 30-year career, calm, measured, controlled. The late evening air was cool, and the courthouse clock across the square had just chimed 8 times. To anyone watching, he looked like a retired officer finishing a routine visit with former colleagues. But inside the department, the atmosphere was far from routine. Detective Laura Kessler sat in the conference room replaying the interview again. Every pause, every shift in Mercer's tone, every moment where the silence stretched just a little too long. When people carry secrets for decades, the truth doesn't usually explode outward all at once. It leaks out slowly, through the cracks in their composure. And Mercer's composure had cracked, just slightly, when she mentioned the blood in the back seat. That moment kept replaying in her mind, because fear had flickered across his face. Not surprise.
Fear.
Meanwhile, the investigation moved forward on another front. If Mercer wouldn't talk, then the landscape around County Road 44 might. 27 years had passed since Emily Harper vanished. The fields surrounding the road had changed, some farms sold, others abandoned, tree lines grown thicker with time. But the basic geography remained the same: long stretches of rural land, scattered barns, gravel access roads disappearing into patches of woods. In 1998, search teams had combed the area on foot. Volunteers spread across fields in wide lines. Helicopters scanned from above. Divers checked nearby ponds. But those searches had limitations. Now investigators had tools that didn't exist back then. 2 days after Mercer's interview, a team arrived with ground-penetrating radar units, cadaver dogs trained to detect decades-old human remains, and high-resolution aerial mapping equipment. The new search would focus on locations Mercer could have reached within a short drive of where Emily's car was found. Detective Kessler stood at the edge of County Road 44 as the team prepared their equipment. The road looked almost identical to the photographs from 1998. 2 narrow lanes of cracked pavement. Bare trees leaning over the shoulders. A long silence broken only by wind moving through dry grass. If violence had happened here, the landscape had kept that secret for nearly 3 decades. The first search area was a stretch of woods about half a mile from where Emily's car had been discovered. In the original investigation, volunteers walked through the trees but found nothing. Now the radar unit moved slowly across the ground, scanning beneath the surface for disturbances. Fresh graves leave patterns in soil density that can persist for years, even decades. The cadaver dogs followed behind, noses close to the ground, handlers watching carefully for any change in behavior. For hours, nothing happened. Just the quiet rhythm of machines scanning the earth. Then, late in the afternoon, one of the dogs stopped. The animal froze near a patch of uneven ground between 2 trees. Its handler looked up immediately. "Alert," he said. The dog circled once, then sat. The signal it had detected something. Kessler felt a surge of adrenaline. Ground-penetrating radar was moved into position. The screen displayed a faint image of the soil layers below. Then a shape appeared. Not large, but clearly different from the surrounding earth. A rectangular disturbance about 3 feet beneath the surface. The team fell silent, because everyone there understood what that could mean. A shovel struck the ground minutes later. The first layer of dirt came up easily. Then the second. Then the third. Each shovel movement seemed to slow time itself. 27 years of unanswered questions sat inside that hole. But after nearly 2 hours of digging, the team uncovered the truth. Not bones. Not a body. Just an old rusted metal container buried in the ground. The lid was pried open carefully. Inside were scraps of cloth, a broken flashlight, and several pieces of old rope. No human remains. The search team stepped back. It wasn't the answer they hoped for, but it was still strange. Why would someone bury those items deep in the woods? Kessler examined the flashlight carefully. The plastic casing was cracked with age, but the design looked familiar. Too familiar. She had seen something like it before. Later that evening, she returned to the evidence room and opened the original Harper case file again. Photographs from 1998 spread across the table. One image showed the interior of Emily's car, a flashlight resting on the floor behind the passenger seat. The same model. But that flashlight had disappeared before investigators collected the vehicle as evidence. It wasn't logged in the inventory. Someone had removed it from the car before the tow truck arrived. Kessler stared at the photograph, then at the rusted flashlight recovered from the woods. If the 2 items were the same, it meant someone had taken evidence from Emily's car and buried it nearby. And the only person known to be alone with the car before the investigation began was Daniel Mercer. The discovery deepened the suspicion surrounding him. But it also raised a terrifying possibility. If Mercer removed items from the vehicle that morning, what else might he have taken? And more importantly, what might he have done with Emily herself? Back in Ridgeway, Mercer's quiet house sat in darkness. Investigators had begun discreet surveillance the day after his interview. Unmarked vehicles parked at different points along the street. Officers watching quietly from a distance. For 2 days, Mercer followed a predictable routine. Morning walks. Short trips to the grocery store. Hours spent inside the house. But on the third night, something changed. Just after midnight, Mercer's garage door opened. A dark pickup truck backed slowly into the street. The surveillance team immediately alerted Kessler. Within minutes, detectives were following from several cars behind. Mercer drove west out of Ridgeway, past empty fields, past long stretches of highway where the headlights cut through the darkness. Then he turned onto a familiar road, County Road 44. Kessler's heart pounded as the convoy of unmarked vehicles slowed at a distance. Mercer's truck rolled down the same stretch of pavement where Emily's abandoned sedan had been discovered 27 years earlier. Finally, he pulled off onto a gravel access road leading into the woods. The truck stopped. Its engine shut off. From the darkness, detectives watched as Mercer stepped out and walked toward the tree line carrying a shovel. No one spoke inside the surveillance vehicles, because everyone there was thinking the same thing. Why would Mercer return to the exact road connected to Emily Harper's disappearance in the middle of the night with a shovel? Kessler whispered into the radio. "Stay back. Let him move." Mercer disappeared into the woods. Minutes passed.
5, 10.
Then the faint sound of metal striking dirt echoed through the trees. The detectives exchanged glances, because the scene unfolding in front of them looked less like coincidence and more like a man returning to a place he thought was forgotten, returning to something buried long ago. And if Mercer was digging tonight, it meant there was still something hidden out there in the darkness of County Road 44. Something that might finally reveal what happened to Emily Harper on that cold October night in 1998. The sound of metal striking earth echoed faintly through the trees, a dull, rhythmic thud that carried across the quiet woods off County Road 44. From the darkness of the surveillance vehicles, Detective Laura Kessler listened carefully through the open crack of the car window. Shovel.
Dirt.
Shovel again. The pattern repeated steadily somewhere beyond the tree line where Daniel Mercer had disappeared only minutes earlier. No one inside the vehicle spoke. Radios stayed silent except for low static. The officers understood the fragile moment they were watching unfold. 27 years of mystery, 27 years of speculation, might be about to surface from the ground in the middle of an Ohio forest. Kessler checked her watch. 12 minutes since Mercer walked into the trees. The digging continued. Slow, deliberate. Not the frantic motion of someone panicking. More like someone who knew exactly where to dig. That detail alone sent a chill through the entire team. Because if Mercer knew where something was buried, it meant this wasn't a random midnight trip. This was memory. Kessler finally picked up the radio. Move in. The officers stepped out of their vehicles almost silently, flashlights off, weapons secured but ready. They followed the narrow path Mercer had taken into the woods, the beam of the moon filtering weakly through branches above. The sound of digging grew louder. 30 yards in, then 20. Finally, a figure appeared between the trees. Daniel Mercer stood beside a shallow hole in the ground, shovel in hand, breathing heavily as he worked. A small lantern sat on a rock nearby, casting a pale yellow glow over the dirt. For a moment the detectives simply watched him. The man who once wore the same uniform they did. The man who had helped investigate Emily Harper's disappearance. Now digging alone in the woods at midnight. Kessler stepped forward. Daniel. Mercer froze. The shovel stopped moving. Slowly, he turned toward the sound of her voice. Flashlights snapped on around him. Beams of white light cut through the darkness. Mercer blinked into the sudden brightness, his face pale. For a brief second, he said nothing. Then he looked down at the hole beside him. "Didn't think you'd find me this fast," he murmured. Kessler approached carefully. "What are you doing out here?" Mercer leaned on the shovel handle, catching his breath. "Fixing a mistake," he said quietly. The words hung in the cold night air. Behind him the hole in the ground was already 2 feet deep. A rectangle carved into the soil. Exactly the kind of shape investigators search for when looking for a grave. Kessler glanced toward it. "Step away from the hole, Daniel." Mercer hesitated. Then he slowly set the shovel down and stepped back. Officers moved forward immediately, securing him without resistance. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Mercer didn't struggle. He simply watched as detectives approached the pit he had been digging. The dirt around the edges was freshly turned. Someone had clearly buried something here long ago. One of the officers knelt and brushed away loose soil with his hands. Then he stopped. Something here. Kessler moved closer. A fragment of white appeared beneath the dirt. At first it looked like a rock, but the shape was wrong. Too smooth. Too curved. The officer brushed away more soil. The outline became clearer.
Bone.
Human bone. The forest fell silent. For 27 years, Emily Harper had been missing. Now, under a thin layer of Ohio soil, the truth was finally emerging. The excavation team was called immediately. Within hours, the quiet patch of woods transformed into a full forensic scene. Floodlights illuminated the trees. Yellow tape marked the perimeter. Investigators worked slowly, carefully removing layers of dirt from the shallow grave Mercer had started reopening. By dawn, the remains were fully exposed. A human skeleton lay curled in the earth. Fragments of clothing still clung to the bones, faded fabric that once might have been a jacket, a pair of jeans. But the most chilling detail sat beside the skull. A rusted piece of metal partially buried in the dirt. A police badge. Kessler stared at it in disbelief. The badge number was still barely visible through the corrosion. It belonged to Daniel Mercer. For a long moment no one spoke, because the image was almost impossible to process. The man who had worn that badge for decades. The man who had investigated crimes under its authority. Now connected to a grave hidden in the woods. The remains were transported to the county medical examiner's office later that morning. Forensic analysis would take time, days, maybe weeks, to confirm the identity through dental records or DNA. But deep down, everyone involved already knew what they had found. Emily Harper had finally been located. Buried less than a mile from where her car had been abandoned. Buried in a place Mercer clearly remembered even after nearly 3 decades. Back at the station, Daniel Mercer sat in the same interview room where he had denied everything just days earlier. Only now the evidence had changed. The prosecutor placed a photograph on the table. The excavation site. The skeleton in the dirt. Mercer stared at it for several seconds. Then he closed his eyes. "You found her," he said quietly. No one responded. Mercer opened his eyes again and looked at Detective Kessler. "I always wondered if someone would." Kessler leaned forward. "Why did you come back tonight?" Mercer took a long breath. "Because you were getting close." The confession didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly over the next hour, like pieces of a story Mercer had kept buried in his mind for 27 years. He admitted encountering Emily Harper that night near the bar district. He said he pulled her over for what he described as a routine stop. But something about the encounter escalated. An argument. Anger.
Fear.
According to Mercer, Emily tried to leave. He forced her into the back seat of her own car. That was where the blood came from. The injury wasn't fatal. Not at first. But Mercer panicked. He drove her out to County Road 44. Into the darkness where no one would see. The rest of the story grew quieter as Mercer spoke. He said Emily fought. He said things got out of control. And, by the time the struggle ended, she wasn't breathing anymore. Mercer buried her in the woods before dawn. Then he returned to the road. When the truck driver reported the abandoned car hours later, Mercer responded to the call like any other officer. Standing beside the same vehicle where the crime had begun. Writing the first report. Guiding the investigation. And slowly watching the case grow colder with each passing year. When Mercer finished speaking, the room was silent. Kessler looked at him carefully. "You lived with that for 27 years, she said. Mercer nodded. Every day. Outside the station, news of the discovery was already spreading across Brookhaven. Residents who had grown up hearing about Emily Harper's mysterious disappearance were now waking up to something unimaginable. The cold case that haunted their town had finally been solved. But the truth behind it was more shocking than anyone expected. Because the man responsible had been there from the very beginning. Wearing a badge. Standing at the crime scene. And for nearly 3 decades, No one realized the first officer who arrived that morning already knew exactly where Emily Harper was buried. The news moved through Brookhaven like a shockwave. At first it came through whispers, neighbors leaning across fences, early morning phone calls between families who had known Emily Harper since childhood. Then the television stations arrived. Satellite trucks lined the courthouse square. Reporters stood in front of cameras repeating the same unbelievable headline again and again. A missing woman, 27 years, a buried grave in the woods, and the suspect a retired police officer who had once helped investigate the very case. Inside the Brookhaven Police Department, the atmosphere was heavy with something deeper than relief. Yes, the cold case had finally broken open. Yes, Emily Harper had been found. But the truth had exposed a wound inside the department itself. Daniel Mercer had worn their badge. For decades, Detective Laura Kessler stood in the hallway outside the interrogation room while Mercer's recorded confession was transferred to evidence storage. The building buzzed with activity, detectives moving quickly, phones ringing, reporters calling nonstop, but inside the small observation window the scene remained still. Mercer sat alone at the metal table, hands cuffed, head slightly lowered. For 27 years he had lived quietly, carrying a secret no one suspected. Now the silence around him felt heavier than any prison cell. Chief Benton stepped beside Kessler. "You did it," he said quietly. Kessler didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched Mercer through the glass. "No," she said after a moment. "Emily deserved better than this." The medical examiner's confirmation arrived 2 days later. Dental records matched the skeletal remains recovered from the grave. The identity was official. Emily Harper, 24 years old when she disappeared. 51 years old now, if she had lived. The announcement hit the town hard. For nearly 3 decades, people in Brookhaven had imagined dozens of possibilities about what happened to her. Some believed she ran away. Others feared she had been taken by a stranger passing through town. Very few had ever imagined the truth, that the person responsible was a police officer who stood beside them during the search. Someone who shook hands with volunteers while they combed the fields. Someone who spoke to Emily's parents while pretending to share their grief. The Harper family received the confirmation in a private meeting with investigators. Emily's mother, Margaret Harper, was 78 now. Her hair had turned silver, her hands trembling slightly as she listened to the details. For years she had lived with uncertainty, not knowing, not understanding. Now she finally had an answer. But the answer carried its own kind of pain. "Did she suffer?" Margaret asked quietly. Kessler paused before responding. "According to the evidence," she said gently, "the struggle was brief." Margaret closed her eyes. For a moment the room fell silent. Then she nodded slowly. "At least we know now." The funeral took place a week later. Hundreds of people gathered at Brookhaven Memorial Cemetery. Some had known Emily personally. Others had only grown up hearing the story of the girl who vanished on a quiet October night. The town had carried that story for nearly 3 decades. Now, they were finally saying goodbye. Detective Kessler stood near the back of the crowd as the service ended. A cold breeze moved through the rows of gravestones, rustling dry leaves across the ground. Nearby, Chief Benton spoke quietly with members of the Harper family. Beyond them, television cameras waited at a respectful distance. The story had become national news. A cold case solved after 27 years. A hidden grave uncovered in the woods. A police officer exposed as the man responsible. But what the headlines didn't capture was the deeper impact on the people who lived here. The teachers who remembered Emily as a quiet student in the front row. The friends who sat beside her at the lantern room the night she disappeared. The officers who once worked patrol shifts with Daniel Mercer, trusting him with their lives. All of them were now forced to reconcile 2 versions of the same man. The colleague they thought they knew, and the killer who buried a young woman in the woods. Mercer was transferred to the county detention center while prosecutors prepared formal charges: kidnapping, murder, abuse of a corpse, and multiple counts of evidence tampering. The confession alone was powerful. But investigators continued building the case carefully. Because trials require proof, not just stories. The rusted flashlight recovered from the woods matched the one seen in photographs of Emily's car. Fibers from Mercer's old patrol jacket, preserved in department storage, matched fibers found in the grave soil. Every detail strengthened the narrative Mercer had finally admitted. The night Emily Harper disappeared was no longer a mystery. It was a crime. A brutal moment of violence that began with a routine traffic stop and ended with a shallow grave beneath the trees. Weeks later, Detective Kessler returned to County Road 441 last time. The excavation site had been filled in. Fresh soil covered the place where investigators uncovered the grave. From the road, nothing looked unusual anymore. Just trees. Just quiet farmland stretching toward the horizon. The same landscape that had hidden the truth for 27 years. Kessler stepped out of her car and walked a short distance into the woods. The air smelled faintly of damp earth. She stopped at the spot where the grave had been. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "We found you." In many ways, the Emily Harper case had followed the familiar pattern of so many cold cases. A missing person, an abandoned vehicle, years of silence. But what made this story different, what made it unforgettable, was how close the truth had always been. The man responsible didn't flee the state. He didn't vanish into another identity. He stayed, working patrol shifts, attending department meetings, standing at crime scenes, watching investigators search for answers he already knew. For nearly 3 decades, Daniel Mercer lived an ordinary life while the town around him wondered what had happened to Emily Harper. And the only reason the truth finally surfaced was a single strand of hair preserved in an evidence box. A fragment of DNA, so small investigators in 1998 barely knew what to do with it. Time had done the rest. Technology advanced. Memories resurfaced. Witnesses came forward. And eventually the past caught up with the man who thought he had buried it forever. Back in Brookhaven, life slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Shops reopened. Children rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. The courthouse clock continued chiming every hour. But the story of Emily Harper would never disappear from this town again. Because now it had an ending. An ending written not just in police reports and courtroom documents, but in the long memory of a community that spent 27 years asking the same haunting question. What happened on County Road 44? Now they finally knew. And the truth was more chilling than anyone had imagined. The courtroom was silent the morning Daniel Mercer finally faced the charges that had followed him out of the woods on County Road 44. Nearly 3 decades had passed since the night Emily Harper vanished, but the room felt as if time itself had folded back on that moment. Every seat in the gallery was filled, local residents, reporters, retired officers who once worked beside Mercer, and people who had never known Emily but had grown up hearing her story. At the defense table, Mercer looked older than he had during his arrest months earlier. His shoulders had sunk slightly, his hair now fully gray, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. Across the room, the Harper family sat quietly together. Margaret Harper held a photograph of her daughter taken sometime in the early 1990s. In it, Emily was smiling, her hair pulled back, sunlight catching her face in a way that made the image feel almost alive. That photograph had appeared in newspapers in 1998. It had appeared again 27 years later when the cold case reopened. Now it rested gently in Margaret's hands as the trial began. The prosecution's case was methodical. They started with the timeline. Emily leaving the lantern room shortly before midnight. The dispatch recording of Mercer's routine stop at 12:41 a.m. The unexplained gap in his patrol log. The sighting at the Silver Grill diner around 3 a.m., where a waitress remembered dirt on his uniform. Each piece placed Mercer closer and closer to the moment Emily disappeared. Then came the forensic evidence. The lab technician explained how a single hair strand recovered from the rear seat of Emily's car had been preserved since 1998. At the time, the sample had been too small to analyze. But modern DNA technology changed everything. The technician described how the strand produced a full genetic profile that matched Mercer with near absolute certainty. The courtroom listened in silence. One strand of hair. That was all it took to reopen a case that had been frozen for decades. Next came the blood evidence. Forensic photographs of the back seat were displayed on a screen. A faint smear on the door handle, barely visible in the original investigation. But modern testing revealed the truth. The blood belonged to Emily Harper. The implication was clear. She had been injured inside the car, and Mercer's DNA had been found beside it. But the most powerful moment of the trial came when investigators described the night Mercer returned to the woods. Detective Laura Kessler took the stand and recounted the surveillance operation step by step. The midnight drive, the truck turning onto County Road 44, the shovel, the digging. The moment officers approached and saw Mercer standing beside a half-open grave. The jury watched as photographs from the excavation appeared on the screen. The shallow pit, the skeletal remains, the rusted police badge lying in the dirt beside the body. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, because the image carried a symbolism no one could ignore. A badge meant to represent protection, buried beside the victim of the man who wore it. Finally, the prosecution played Mercer's recorded confession. His voice filled the courtroom.
Calm.
Flat. Resigned. He described pulling Emily over near the bar district. He described the argument that escalated into violence. He described forcing her into the back seat. And he described the moment everything spiraled beyond control. No one spoke as the recording ended. The room remained completely still. When the defense presented their case, it was brief. Mercer's attorneys didn't attempt to deny the evidence. They focused instead on his age, his decades of service, the claim that the killing had not been premeditated. But even those arguments felt thin against the weight of the facts. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury began deliberations. Brookhaven held its breath. The courthouse square filled again with reporters waiting for the outcome. Residents gathered in diners and living rooms across town, watching the same question that had haunted them for nearly 30 years finally move toward a verdict. The jury returned after 6 hours. Daniel Mercer stood as the foreperson read the decision.
Guilty.
On every count. The word echoed softly through the courtroom. Mercer closed his eyes briefly, but showed little reaction. For many in the room, the verdict brought a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Justice had finally arrived. But it had arrived decades late. During sentencing a week later, Mercer was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge spoke firmly as he delivered the sentence. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Emily Harper left this community in pain and uncertainty. You used the authority of your badge to commit this crime, and then you used that same authority to hide it. Mercer listened quietly. When the judge finished, Margaret Harper was given the opportunity to speak. She walked slowly to the podium, still holding the same photograph of her daughter. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were steady. For 27 years, we didn't know where Emily was. Every holiday, every birthday, every morning we woke up wondering if today would be the day we finally learned the truth.
She paused.
You took that from us. The courtroom remained silent. Margaret looked toward Mercer. But you didn't take everything. Because people kept searching. People kept asking questions. She held the photograph up gently. And eventually they brought my daughter home. When the hearing ended, Mercer was led away in handcuffs. The same quiet composure remained on his face as the door closed behind him. Outside the courthouse, the sky over Brookhaven was clear and bright. Life moved forward the way it always had. Cars rolled through the town square. The courthouse clock chimed the hour. But the story of Emily Harper had finally reached its end. Not with mystery. Not with unanswered questions. But with truth. 27 years earlier, a young woman drove away from a bar expecting to be home in 15 minutes. Instead, she encountered a police officer who turned a routine traffic stop into a crime that shattered an entire community. For decades, the answer lay hidden beneath a patch of soil in the woods. Hidden by a man who believed time would protect him. But time did the opposite. It preserved the evidence. It sharpened the science, and it ensured that one day the past would surface. All because of a single strand of hair resting quietly in an evidence box. A microscopic fragment that refused to disappear. And in the end, that tiny fragment carried enough truth to solve one of Brookhaven's darkest cold cases and finally give Emily Harper the justice she had waited 27 years to receive. Years after the trial ended, the story of Emily Harper still moved through Brookhaven like a quiet echo that never completely faded. Time continued the way it always does in small towns. The courthouse clock still chimed every hour. The same diners served early morning coffee to the same groups of regulars. Children who were not even born when Emily disappeared now walked the same sidewalks she once did. But the memory of what happened on County Road 44 had changed the town in ways that were harder to see. Because the truth had revealed something people rarely want to confront. Sometimes danger doesn't arrive from outside. Sometimes it already lives within the community. Detective Laura Kessler remained in Brookhaven long after the case was closed. The Emily Harper investigation had become the defining moment of her career, but she rarely spoke about it publicly. For her, the story wasn't just about solving a cold case. It was about what nearly 30 years of silence can do to a community and what it takes to finally break that silence. The evidence that solved the case was eventually placed into long-term storage. The original evidence box, the sealed envelopes, the faded photographs taken on a cold October morning in 1998, and inside one small container, preserved carefully like a relic, rested the strand of hair that changed everything. To anyone looking at it, the hair looked insignificant, thin, fragile, almost invisible. But investigators understood its power. That strand had waited patiently in darkness for 27 years, waiting for technology to catch up, waiting for someone to open the box again and ask the question that had been buried beneath decades of assumptions. What if the answer was already here? Cold cases often feel impossible because time erases so much. Witnesses forget details. Evidence degrades. People move away or pass on. But sometimes time works in the opposite direction. Sometimes it preserves just enough truth for the right moment. Emily Harper's case became a reminder of that. Across the country, other police departments began revisiting their own unsolved cases. Old evidence boxes were reopened. DNA samples, once considered too small, were tested again using modern methods. And in several departments, investigators quietly admitted that the Brookhaven case had influenced their decision. If a 27-year-old mystery could be solved with a single strand of hair, what else might be waiting inside forgotten evidence rooms? Meanwhile, County Road 44 returned to its familiar quiet. The search teams left long ago. The yellow police tape disappeared. The woods reclaimed the patch of ground where Emily had been buried. Grass grew back over the soil. Leaves fell each autumn and covered the forest floor. To someone driving past today, nothing about the road would seem unusual. Just another stretch of rural pavement winding through farmland. But those who know the story still feel something different when they pass that place. A moment of silence. A memory lingering beneath the trees. Because that quiet road once carried a secret for nearly 3 decades. And that secret changed everything when it was finally uncovered. Margaret Harper lived long enough to see the trial, the verdict, and the burial of her daughter. She passed away 3 years later. Friends said that during her final years, something inside her had finally softened. The uncertainty that had haunted her for decades was gone. She knew where Emily was. She knew what happened. And that knowledge, painful as it was, brought a kind of peace. At Emily's grave in Brookhaven Memorial Cemetery, visitors sometimes leave small items beside the headstone. Flowers. Photographs. Handwritten notes. One note appeared there not long after the trial ended. No one ever discovered who left it. But the words remained simple and direct. We never stopped looking. Those words captured the truth behind the entire story. Because the resolution of the Emily Harper case wasn't the result of a single breakthrough. It was the result of persistence. Detectives who reopened the file decades later. Witnesses who came forward with half-forgotten memories. scientists who developed tools capable of reading the smallest traces of DNA, and a community that refused to let the mystery disappear completely. Cold cases survive because questions survive. Even when years pass. Even when evidence gathers dust. Even when the people responsible believe they have escaped. Somewhere, someone eventually asks the question again. What really happened? And sometimes, that question is enough to pull the truth back into the light. Today, inside the Brookhaven Police Department, the Harper file rests in a different section of the archive. Not among the unsolved mysteries. Not among the cold cases waiting for answers. It sits in a cabinet labeled simply,
closed.
But the story inside that file continues to matter. Because it reminds every investigator who reads it of a powerful lesson. Justice can move slowly. It can take years. Sometimes even decades. But if the evidence survives, and if someone is willing to keep searching, the truth has a way of resurfacing. Just like it did beneath the quiet trees along County Road 44. Just like it did because of a single strand of hair. And just like it did for Emily Harper, whose voice was silent for 27 years, until the past finally caught up with the man who tried to bury it forever. Long after the trial ended and the headlines faded, the story of Emily Harper continued to live in the quiet corners of Brookhaven. Not in the loud way news stories exist, bright for a moment and then forgotten, but in the quieter way small towns remember things. People spoke about it in fragments. At the diner over early morning coffee. At family tables during long conversations about the past. Sometimes it came up when someone new moved into town and asked about the road that ran through the fields north of the county line. County Road 44. For most drivers, it was just another stretch of pavement between farms. But for those who remembered the autumn of 1998, the road carried a different meaning. It was the place where a mystery began, and the place where the truth eventually surfaced. Detective Laura Kessler returned there only once more after the case closed. Not as part of an investigation, not with search teams or flashing lights, but quietly alone. It was late afternoon when she parked beside the narrow shoulder. The same road, the same tree line. Almost everything looked exactly as it had in the photographs from decades earlier. Time had moved forward, but the landscape had barely changed. She stepped out of the car and listened to the wind moving through the fields. The air smelled faintly of soil and dry leaves, the same scent that must have hung there the morning Emily's abandoned sedan was discovered. Kessler walked a short distance toward the woods where the grave had been found. The ground there had long since been restored. The investigators filled the excavation site, and nature reclaimed the soil quickly. Grass had grown back, blending the area into the surrounding forest floor. Nothing marked the spot now, but Kessler knew exactly where it was. For nearly 3 decades, that place held the answer to one of the town's most painful questions. She stood there for a long moment, not thinking about Daniel Mercer, not thinking about the trial or the evidence or the endless hours spent reconstructing the past. She thought about Emily, a young woman driving home late at night. A routine trip that should have lasted 15 minutes. A moment of trust in a flashing police light behind her car. And the terrible chain of events that followed. In many ways, the investigation had revealed something larger than a single crime. It exposed how fragile trust can be. When Mercer wore the badge, people believed he represented safety. That belief allowed him to pull someone over on a dark road without raising suspicion. It allowed him to stand beside search teams the next morning. It allowed him to help guide an investigation that was unknowingly circling around him. And for 27 years, no one realized the truth had been standing quietly in uniform from the very beginning. The case forced the Brookhaven Police Department to look at itself differently. New policies were introduced in the years following the trial. Evidence procedures were tightened. Patrol documentation became far more detailed. Routine stops required complete records and digital logs. The department didn't speak about Mercer often, but his actions left a permanent mark on how the agency operated. Because sometimes the most painful lessons are the ones that shape the future the most. Meanwhile, the story of Emily Harper slowly transformed into something else. It stopped being just a mystery. It became a reminder. A reminder that time does not erase truth. it only delays its discovery. In classrooms at Brookhaven High School, teachers occasionally mention the case when discussing the evolution of forensic science. Students who had been born decades after Emily disappeared listened with fascination when they learned that the entire investigation had turned because of a single piece of evidence. One strand of hair. A fragment so small that investigators in 1998 barely knew how to analyze it. But science advanced. DNA sequencing improved. And suddenly that tiny strand held a voice strong enough to expose a secret that had lasted nearly 3 decades. Cold cases often feel frozen in time, but they are rarely truly dead. They wait. In evidence boxes. In forgotten witness memories. In places where the truth has been buried but not destroyed. The Emily Harper case proved that patience, technology, and persistence can eventually break even the longest silence. Years later, visitors sometimes pass Emily's grave at Brookhaven Memorial Cemetery without realizing the full weight of the story behind the name carved into the stone. The headstone is simple. Just her name, her birth year, and the year she was finally laid to rest. Beneath it, a short inscription reads, "Remembered always." For the Harper family, that phrase carried enormous meaning, because remembering was the reason the case never truly disappeared. The community remembered. The investigators remembered. And eventually, someone reopened the file and looked at the evidence with fresh eyes. That act, small, almost routine, became the turning point. Because the past has a strange patience. It waits quietly for someone willing to listen. Somewhere inside the Brookhaven Police Department archives, the Harper file still exists. The photographs are preserved. The reports remain organized in careful order. And the evidence box that once held the hair strand is sealed again, labeled and stored as part of a closed investigation. But its presence carries a message every investigator who sees it understands. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes generations. But when the truth is preserved, even in the smallest fragment, it has a way of resurfacing. Just like it did in Brookhaven. Just like it did for Emily Harper. And just like it will for other cases still waiting in the quiet darkness of evidence rooms across the world. Because somewhere, right now, another forgotten strand of evidence may already be holding the answer to a mystery that time has not yet solved.